Started. Hello and welcome. Thank you for logging on and attending this evening's poetry program. My name is Matt Schumann. I am on the programming team here at Cary Library. Before we begin, just a few notes. You can order each of the author's books through Porter Square Books, and I will put the link to that, to those books in the chat. Let me know if there are any technical issues that I can try to resolve. You can send those to me in the chat. And if you have any questions or comments, please use the Q&A button. This program is made possible by the generous donors to the Cary Library Foundation. I'd like to now introduce Cammy Thomas. She has published 2 books of poems, Cathedral of Wish and Inscriptions. Her 3rd book, Tremors, will be out this fall, and each of these books was published by 4 Way Books. She lives here in Lexington, and now please welcome Cammy.
Welcome to everyone. I want to thank Christine Muir, who is Cary Library's community librarian, who was my partner in this venture, and Matt Schumann, who was just speaking, the library associate, who has been very, very helpful in all our readings to make this evening and other evenings possible. Thank you so much, Matt. And thanks to the 3 readers, about whom more in a moment. And of course, I'm incredibly grateful to everyone who is here this evening. I'm sorry I can't see you, but at least I can see your names, and I'm very, very thankful for you to be here. I'm sure we're all happy for the distraction this evening while waiting for the results of you know what that shall not be named at this time. We are very lucky tonight to have 3 very accomplished poets, all with new books, and all from the greater Boston area. Steven Cramer, Joyce Peseroff, and Jeffrey Harrison, who will be not reading in that order, actually. You will hear the order they're reading in. Unfortunately, we don't have a cozy room full of people and a stack of delicious new books for us to touch and buy and have signed by the authors, but I hope we'll make a cozy space tonight and take the time afterward to order books. Information about that will be posted in the chat. Next time we see these readers, we can get them to sign the books. So first, we're going to hear from Steven Cramer. Steven's new book is called Listen. He's the author of 5 previous collections, most recently Clangings from 2012 and Goodbye to the Orchard from 2004, which won the Sheila Motton Prize from the New England Poetry Club and was named an honor book in poetry by the Massachusetts Center for the Book. Recipient of 2 grants from the Massachusetts Cultural Council and a National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship, he founded and teaches in the Low-Residency MFA Program in creative writing at Lesley University. His website is stevencramer.com. Steven.
Thank you. Thanks, Cammy. Thanks, Christine Muir, and special thanks to Matt for adapting this for a webinar at the last minute with absolutely no pain to us. And thank all of you for coming. It's a little odd that I can't see any of you, but I will do my best. I'd put this, I'm going to read from a section of the book that includes poems in which the social world, the political world, and the more personal world sort of interact and really almost come to blows with each other in some ways. And I'd put it together. The poems are a little mordant, a little ambivalent. And for a while I thought, oh man, that might be really tonally inappropriate for an evening of celebration. We are not there yet. So in fact, ambivalence seems perhaps appropriate. I'll start with a poem called American Freedom, The title actually comes from a message that turned up on my landline's caller ID. I got a call from American Freedom. There are a couple quotations, one from the political theorist Naomi Klein, one from the poet Richard Hugo from his essay Writing Off the Subject. I guess I will do that so you can see the quotation marks. And this was written shortly after the Parkland school shooting. American Freedom. The poet gets a call from American Freedom. He doesn't pick up. He'd been reading a thriller in which the timing device required a code spelled B-A-B-Y. Punch it in, you survive. He writes an email quoting Naomi Klein. For men who rule this world, rules are for other people. Stashes it in drafts to save for second thoughts. So what's running the gamut in the poet's memory? A neighbor he saw spurt out of his front door, his face gone redder than the bloodier verses in the Bible. Then a man he watched pray to a singing bowl struck with a mallet. Tones so lovely he considered praying too. When the obits of 17 students grin from the Times and the Globe, for a day or two, poetry feels shifty, a stump speech. Never write a poem about anything that needs a poem about it, wrote Richard Hugo. Dick, he thinks, times change. Meanwhile, the hawthorn in his yard extends its scabby limbs, thick as Doric columns, over Bedford's thoroughfare to and from school. For the sake of the kids who scuffle by, it's got to be cut down. I have no idea whether you guys can hear me. I don't know whether you can like do thumbs up in the chat or something like that you can hear, or thumbs down if you can't. This is a short poem called Frontier. Frontier. It wasn't easy to cross the border, but we did it by forming groups of 4, one person for each corner of the earth, and moving through the dark suburbs all winter. And afterward, our lives came to depend on our myth, like the tales of Scheherazade. So many of us. You couldn't leave your house without finding clusters of us bundled together like evicted families, some with dogs trotting behind, some with umbrellas, some casting shadows twice their size on the painted backdrops to our journey. And we knew we'd be freed when we arrived. That much the legends verified. Every parched lip and blistered tongue would have its say, and once the testimony ended, the trials would end in acquittal. The sirens would cease, and we'd be able to sleep. How can you say, after all our efforts, that we were wrong? That the other side of the frontier beckoned with a lie? This is called In Dunedin, short poem. Dunedin is a university town in New Zealand where my son studied for a year, and we went to visit him. There's a reference to the Octagon, which is the main square in Dunedin. Flat whites are pretty much like lattes New Zealanders drink. They call each other, New Zealanders call each other Kiwis. And for this trip, 24 hours away or however far away it was, I was looking around Walter Isaacson's biography of Leonardo da Vinci. I don't travel light. In Dunedin, around the Octagon, people drink flat whites, don't leave tips. Kiwis pay a living wage. As overseas as the jet-lagged get, winter in August, yesterday in the States, we sit like silhouettes, here and not here. Lifting her white shift, she pisses in a storefront, perineum aimed at the cafe. In the book of my lap, Leonardo's Vitruvian Man, his ideal body squaring the circle. On our list of sights not to be missed, blue penguins waddling upshore to nest. Circling the square, her awful squawk grows distant, comes back. She raises her shift right at us. Hard to admit, our disgust reflex rises like reflux. Harder still that she makes us feel at home. This poem is called Hours, and the second half of it is set at Sanibel Beach Resort. Sanibel is a town in Florida on the Gulf Coast that Joyce knows quite well. There's a line that says "click here," and in fact, it does. In the notes, there is a URL to a list of racial and ethnic slurs. I had a chance. I published this in an online magazine, so I could actually use the hyperlink. There's a reference near the end of the poem to Americans. There are quite a few references to Americans. The second to last time, it's referring to a breakfast special. And I've already changed a word in this poem since the book came out. Hours, Sanibel Beach Resort. Years ago, we took us and our kids on a 90% white cruise to Istanbul from Rome. In no time, I got smart at discriminating my white from the others. I watched Italians bully in line for iced tea and lemonade, the two free drinks, their Dantesque vowels, honey on the page, a sort of noise pollution in my airspace. The English, being Brits, cued. The French seemed to take their cues from the Italians. The Germans had no sense of line at all. But oh, my Americans, you made mouth sounds like rusted gears, belched at will, your slurry banter fit for jotting down only on the blackest cocktail napkins. And not just did I know your every slight, for an exhaustively ugly list, click here. But by tween age, I'd had the lot by heart. Now, down in Sanibel, our black 30-something waitress warms my coffee. The server's Floridian lilt has me constantly asking, sorry? My tip at 18%, a runt of a reparation. It's her kids, not ours, who will sink first under the next flood. There's jack shit that she or semi-snowbirds like ourselves can do to stop it. Is there a map of downtown? Is the best I've got to ask her. What downtown? Her better answer. What's in my head is more or less in hers. Gates that open into gardens outside time. But each gate locks out them, us in, our gardens ours. She's about to clear away the yoky orts of our Americans. We rise to go. No clearer where in America we are. And I'll just read one more poem. It's called The Look. I hope it's extremely straightforward. I worked hard to make it simple. The second to last stanza on this evening, I hope will turn into a valediction. The Look. I'll never tell Ethan I listened to him sing in the shower. It might make him stop. I like whoever's singing to keep singing. I pause at the door until the water shuts. To some, singing's a sin, a capital crime. Some, to brighten their afterlives, pack mirror shards into a pipe, thus boosting their radius of kills in song at prayer. Have you ever tried talking to a guitarist as they play? Not on stage, of course, but in a room where their strumming consorts with the gossip. There's a look I'll call the look. My brother, 1945 to 1990, had it. My nephew, who, for a living, bivouacs north of the Muir Woods, making fire with a spindle, hearthboard, bow, and bearing block, has it too. A stare aimed through you, blank as sheets of still reamed paper. So anything you say leaves no mark. A mindful mindlessness where the work of play gets done. Ethan grudgingly began on a Yamaha acoustic, cheapest guitar you can buy that's not a toy. 30 daily minutes of fretfully gripped chords. Feeling his parents mute cheerleading from the living room, we feigned reading. He retreated to the basement from the den. We eavesdropped through the cellar door. Quote, English speakers know that cellar door is among the loveliest phrases in our tongue, especially if detached from its sense, said Tolkien. Not the first to say it, but I have a hatred of apartheid in my bones belongs to him alone. Ethan's milestone was a trademark lick, House of the Rising Sun. Work made play? Not quite. Songs still groped to a halt. Dad to the marrow, I've hyped his steps from chords to chord progressions, aspiring up the stairs. The ones he coined, he called noodlings, tunes stitched from bits his hand happened on. 3 years plus, our language blown to atoms, losers, fake, haters, failing, fire and fury. And those two, so barefaced, they spit, excuse me, believe me. When Ethan finally added his own lyrics, when what he wrote, he sang, we listened even closer through the cellar door, not to a novice, but to a master of the look. Thank you, everybody. This is one of the most bizarre experiences I can think of to read to, but thank you.
It is very bizarre. I agree. You sort of read into the void. But I do invite people who want to make comments, to admire these poems. Please do feel free to use the chat. It's kind of nice for the poets to feel there's somebody out there. All right. So thank you so much, Steven. That was wonderful. Our next reader will be Jeffrey Harrison, who's the author of 6 full-length books of poetry, most recently Between Lakes, published by Four-Way Books in this past September. His previous book, Into Daylight, won the Dorset Prize and was published by Tupelo Press in 2014. His first book, The Singing Underneath, was selected by James Merrill for the National Poetry Series in 1987. He's received fellowships from the Guggenheim Foundation and the National Endowment for the Arts, among other honors. His poems have appeared widely in magazines and journals, as well as in Best American Poetry, the Pushcart Prize volumes, and other anthologies, and been featured regularly on the Writer's Almanac, Poetry Daily, and other online or media venues. His website is jeffreyharrisonpoet.com. Jeff.
Thank you, Cammy, and thank you, Steven, for that wonderful reading, and all of you for coming. It is weird that we can't see you, but I can see your names, and it's nice that you're here. Steven and Joyce are reading together, and I heard them read very recently together. They're sort of on the Zoom road, and it was nice of them to let me read with them tonight. It's nice to read with friends. So I am going to read from this book, Between Lakes, which is in 4 sections. When Steven read the other day, he talked about how his book starts dark. Mine actually starts light and gets darker. So I'm going to read a couple of poems from the first section. This is called Varnishing Days, and it's just comparing late spring to an unfinished painting, and refers to the tradition at the Royal Academy and other places where they would hang the paintings before they were finished. They'd hang them for the show and put the finishing touches on. If you saw the movie Mr. Turner, there was a scene that showed that. Varnishing Days. These days between late spring and early summer are like paintings already hanging but not yet finished the week before the summer exhibition, still waiting for their final touches and smelling of linseed and turpentine. Everything fresh, the paint still wet, the taut sky primed with a wash of blue. The Siberian irises, not yet unfurling, their buds still tight, look like paintbrushes saturated with ultramarine. Buttercups spatter the meadow with yellow. From an arbor of scribbled vines, blossom clusters of wisteria dangle, glistening with last night's rain. A wood thrush calls in liquid trills from deep within the background's mass of pale, soft greens. The air chills while the sun warms the scene. May these days remain unfinished a while longer, with no artist jostling his way in to apply some final flourish or a coat of varnish that will only darken. Let the bumblebee fumble among the blossoms. And this next poem is, I'm sure you all remember, the Boston people at least, the winter, I think it was 2015, where it snowed so much. And we got horrible ice dams and a lot of window damage. So I had to learn how to glaze windows because I didn't want to pay for someone doing that. So this is called Glazing a Window. And it's pretty obviously an Ars Poetica too. Glazing a window. As usual, when I begin, I feel as though I don't know what I'm doing and have to learn it all over again. And sure enough, on my very first pane, the size and shape of a page, the blade of the putty knife pulls the ribbon of soft glazing compound right off the strip of trim I'm trying to press it into. I start again, and then again, and eventually get into a rhythm, making small adjustments as I go, and taking pleasure in the way the knife blade compresses the putty into a smooth bevel while its sharp edge cuts a clean line against the glass, the excess curling away. And I move from pane to pane, still making mistakes, of course, but amending them as best I can while trying not to lose my focus, trying to get into a groove and stay there. And when I'm done, I wipe away my smudged fingerprints so my labor doesn't show, and the window glistens with the day's reflection. Okay, I'm gonna try and share the screen right now and show you something, just because you can do this on Zoom, or I mean, I hope I can do it. Hopefully you can see that painting by Piero della Francesca right there. That painting was visiting the MFA from Italy a few years ago, and I went to see it with a friend who is a painter and a writer. And this is just sort of about the conversation we had while looking at the painting. I realized that, well, somebody pointed out that some of these things that I'm saying about the painting aren't really true, but I knew that, and hopefully it's obvious. Sharing a painting. For half an hour, we had the painting mostly to ourselves. And the longer we stood there, taking it in together, the more the people drifting around us seemed to disappear. We spoke quietly when we spoke at all, as though trying not to discomfort the mother and child, though they seemed imperturbable, inhabiting a world apart, along with the two angels who stood behind them on either side, vigilant, looking in different directions, like, I said, celestial Secret Service agents. The one in the blue robe, head globed as though in a space helmet, fixed us in his gaze and seemed to be guarding a back room that you said looked inviting, illuminated by a slanting beam of tangible sunlight. I couldn't help remarking that the basket of gauze cloth behind the other angel looked like a pie topped with meringue, placed on an upper shelf to cool beyond the reach of mortals. We marveled at the tenderness of Mary's delicate fingers cradling the feet of the child, who appeared to weigh several pounds less than if he'd been part of our world. He shared his mother's pensive serenity, had the face of an old man he would never live to be, and wore a coral pendant like a branching artery. He held his right hand up as if to call for silence, but we were done with talking. It was just the two of us and the four of them in that unearthly stillness. So I'm going to unshare that now. And now I'm going to try and share another, you have to unshare and then share again. Okay, hopefully you can see that photograph by Gary Winogrand, which I saw a few years ago at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and later wrote this poem. It's called Girl Carrying a Suitcase. Younger in the photo than my daughter is now, 18 or 19, the same age as my wife when I first met her. She would now be not quite old enough to be my mother, more like an older cousin I saw only in summer and would steal glimpses of or find ways to be near. Just as I kept circling back to this girl's photograph at the exhibition to study again the way her body bends slightly to the right to offset the weight of her fabric-covered suitcase against the lighter raffia bag in her other hand. The tapered cut of her sleeveless dress printed with black-eyed Susans, one centered over a breast, and the way her silver bracelets gather at her wrists below the almost dimples on the inside of her elbows, the photo's shadowed foci. And since bringing home the postcard I bought at the museum shop, I've been searching her image like a figure recovered from my own past. Someone I almost recognize, though her head is veiled in glare and her hair coming loose from her braids conceals the right side of her face. She gazes downward toward the sidewalk she has just stepped onto from the busy crosswalk, unhurried and alone amid the crowd of the city she is either leaving or returning to, but not arriving in for the first time. She is too unguarded, lost in herself, thinking perhaps of whoever she has just been staying with or is about to visit, someone who, whether cousin, friend, parent, or lover, must surely adore her. If only I could find her and show her this photograph, which almost certainly she has never seen, since it was printed for the first time only recently, decades after the photographer's death. Or at least show her this postcard I've been keeping on my desk these last few weeks, giving this stolen glimpse of her past back to her, so she too might be taken by this young woman who was once herself, like someone held dear who left long ago, then one late afternoon shows up at the door. Okay, so moving on. I'm going to move into the middle sections that are about my relationship with my father and his final illness and death. This is called higher education. It mentions Antioch. In fact, that's the first word in the poem. And Stephen pointed out to me that he went to Antioch. Higher education. Antioch, Berkeley, and Columbia were the ABCs of colleges my father said he wouldn't pay for. Breeding grounds for radicalism, he called them, as if their campuses were giant petri dishes spawning toxic cultures. Our own pathology was pretty toxic at the time, both of us stubbornly refusing to learn anything about each other or about ourselves for that matter, stuck in a rudimentary pattern of defining ourselves as opposites. I wouldn't even look at Kenyon, his beloved alma mater, despite its long tradition as a school for future poets. I hadn't read a word of Robert Lowell or James Wright yet, but I'd read Ginsberg, and the first stop on my college tour was Columbia, and that's where I ended up going. And my father, to his credit, must have seen it was the right place for me, or at least was unavoidable. So he let me go, and he paid for it. And the only price I had to pay was when I was home on holidays to suffer his barbed commentary about the very education he was financing, which ironically had to do with the core values of Western civilization. I can't remember, is forgiveness one of them? We both got a C in forgiveness, but later bumped it up to a B- when, in a surprising twist, my son ended up at Kenyon. My father took real pleasure in that, though he was already dying by then. I thought of him at graduation, how proud he would have been for his grandson, who, he might have joked, was a better student than he had ever been. All our ignorance put aside, at least, for that one day of celebration. And this is called Kitchen Incident. Only now, after decades, even after his death, is the smoke finally clearing from that room where I was kneeling on the brick hearth making a fire, something after all that my father had taught me how to do, when he walked in from work in a business suit to find the kitchen filling up with smoke because I'd forgotten to open the flue. And not until now have I bothered to consider what might have happened at the office that day, or whether it was simply his frustration at ceaselessly battling his acerbic teenage son that led him to say, "You don't know how to do anything right," then shoulder me out of the way as he crouched down and reached his blue-sleeved arm above the flames to find the damper's latch. At long last, I wish I hadn't told him to shut up, and can let go of my indignation at the way he lunged for me, grabbed me by the arm, and tried to spank me as if I were a child, only managing a glancing blow as I pulled free and made for the door, not looking back until now to see him standing there, bewildered and alone in that smoke-clogged room. Well, I'm not sure if I should read this next poem or avoid it because of what's going on with the election right now, but I think I'll read it. It's called Politics of the Dead. It's about as close as I come to writing anything political, but it's really about my father and me. It's in 4 parts. 1. When we opened his bye-bye file, we found among the bank codes, passwords, insurance information, power of attorney, and living will, a dozen or so right-wing articles our father had snipped out of newspapers and interspersed among his final instructions, as if even in death he needed to get the last word in. We took them out as we paged through the documents, shaking our heads in disbelief and making a little pile. "What do we do with these?" I asked when we were done. "That's up to you," my brother said. Then, "It's obvious he meant them for you." 2. It's true he used to send me articles like that, and I would send them back with all the cliches and abuses of language circled and annotated in the margins. But years ago, I asked him to stop, then outlawed politics as a topic of conversation, since what we did was not so much converse as bark feral outbursts. We kept the subject buried as best we could, like an underground cable. But here were these articles again, as if he meant to undermine my grief for him. I didn't read them, and when no one was around, slipped them into the recycling bin. 3. Those last few months, I almost hoped he would snap at me. It would have meant he was getting better. He never did. Instead, he watched Fox News, which was sad since that was all he could do. Though why not say the Tennis Channel? It was as if that indoctrination was somehow necessary before entering the next world, which you'd think would be beyond politics, beyond the reach of all those snarling dogmatists that sent the rest of us fleeing to the kitchen, where my mother cried and I tried not to listen, tried to hold my tongue, and sometimes did. 4. I don't know where we were, but my father was sitting across from me talking politics, though not yet with any venom. Still, I was afraid that at any moment he might blurt one of the remarks that made me unable to breathe, much less speak, like I'd bitten into an electric fence. And to prevent that, I said, "I can't believe you want to keep this argument going even after you're dead." Then, as I lay there awake in my bed, I realized that because the dream was mine, I was the one who hadn't let it go. And from here on, it was mine alone. I'll just read a couple more. There are a number of dream poems in this book and a number of photograph poems. And this next poem is sort of both. It's called Scene from a Photograph in a Dream. What was I doing in my childhood room again? And why on my old bed by the window was there a snapshot of my brothers and me in our late teens, wearing blue jeans and sweatshirts, contentedly napping in the living room. My younger brother was lying on the sofa, while below him on the carpet, my older brother and I lay next to each other. What took me by surprise was the way one of my hands was resting on my brother's chest with a natural, unself-conscious intimacy, as though there were no secrets between us, and without the slightest awkwardness that might have caused me to move my hand away if we had woken up. Only sleeping in a living room within a photograph, inside a bedroom in a dream. Never when I was awake or he was alive have I touched my brother with such tenderness. And hopefully not overdoing the dream thing, but this is another one. It's short, it's called Double Visitation. There I was with my brother again alive. Sorry, I just screwed that up. I'm gonna start that over. Double Visitation. There I was with my father again alive, walking around the backyard together. And I hardly noticed that it wasn't our backyard, or that he looked like he was in his 50s. We were laughing at something, joking around, each comment making us laugh even harder. But then he was crying, and I didn't know why, his face contorted, unable to speak. I turned and hugged him and whispered in his ear the words I wanted to say and he wanted to hear. And as if I had uttered some magic formula, I found myself sitting in a movie theater beside my suddenly alive again brother. The movie ended, and as the credits rolled, we both agreed that it was good. Then I said, but I think I fell asleep for part of it, and started telling him the dream I'd had, how our father had visited from the dead, and what I'd done, and to show him, did again, whispering those same words to my brother. And I'll end with the title poem of the book, which I don't actually think I've read at a reading yet. Between Lakes. I used to sneak off with a folding chair down the hill some evenings to the edge of the inlet between lakes and just sit there. It was so quiet, I could hear the distant grinding of tiny creatures boring inside the trunks of the spruces next to me, though sometimes the kingfisher flew by, chattering to himself. I'd try to get caught up in the nets of late sunlight that wavered over the trees on the other bank, or lose myself in their green gold reflections shimmering on the inlet's fluid mirror. Eventually I'd hear someone ask, "Where's Jeff?" And someone else answer, "I don't know." How quickly I revealed my whereabouts by calling to them or just climbing the hill depended on my mood, the beauty of the evening, and something else harder to pin down. But it was never right away. I lingered in the watery, mutable in-between zone, the sky deepening with the possibility that I could be both there and gone. Thank you. I can't hear anything, so.
Thank you so much, Jeff. That was beautiful. It was absolutely wonderful. Thanks. And you should read the chat because there's some stuff in there.
Okay.
Yeah. And still, everybody do comment if you want to. It's nice for the poets to get some sort of feedback. All right. We come to our last reader for this evening, Joyce Peseroff. Petition is Joyce's 6th book of poems. She's the editor of Robert Bly, When Sleepers Awake, The Plowshares Poetry Reader, and Simply Lasting, Writers on Jane Kenyon. Her 5th collection, Know Thyself, was designated a must-read by the 2016 Massachusetts Book Award. Recent poems and reviews appear in Consequence, On the Seawall, Massachusetts Review, and plume. She directed and taught in UMass Boston's MFA program in its first 4 years. Currently, she blogs for her website, joycepeseroff.com, and writes the poetry column for Arrowsmith Press. Joyce.
Thank you so much, Cammy, and thanks to the Carey Memorial Library in Lexington, where I lived until about 9 years ago. And it's such a pleasure to listen to poems by friends, Steven and Jeffrey, poets I admire so much and enjoy hearing whenever I can. I'm going to begin the reading with the title poem to the book, Petition. Petition. Give the wealth back to those we stole it from. Give the land back to those we stole it from. Give our shotguns to those we took the land from. Maybe they'll split the barrels into irrigation pipes. Maybe they'll mill the stocks for bookends, for the books by those we took language from. Give love back to those we banished from our love. Give life back to all who lost insurance for their meds. Give medicine back to those who find it in a tea, a weed, a willow, the heat and light in hands needing a muscle. Give muscle to the tongue's backtalk, curses, and its sweetest nothings, the lay of a ripe peach. Give ripeness to a time. Give us time to restore the forests and the sea we filtered of whales, codfish, and pink dolphins. Give us eternity again. We'll set things right. This next poem is set near Lexington, in Bedford, which is also close to Concord. And I mentioned in the first line of the poem, in the first lines, a cell, many cells where men never see the sun, which is a reference to MCI Concord. And in the last lines of the poem, I mention something called a poor door. In New York City and Manhattan, zoning variance was given to build a luxury tower, but there was a requirement that some of the apartments be set aside for low-income housing. And the tenants in the luxury side didn't want the low-income tenants to use their lobby. So they put them in an entrance on the side, which people call the poor door. Not far from my front porch, near a bank of the Concord River, cattails bent and muddy stones slick in December, is a cell, many cells, where men never see the sun. And further, far from the hum of my new furnace, is a furnace lit and relit by a warplane's vector, the pilot burning to powder city blocks, houses, wall to wall, the mother and father inside churned like concrete, or blasted with shrapnel if they leave, or by a smooth-cheeked soldier with an assault rifle. Lightheaded with hunger, they fall under the treads of a tank. Closer, a man sleeps in a shed with rats, holes in his sleeping bag shedding feathers. Also, a man in a tent, knife at the ready. He hears the flow of the river stilled by frost that creeps from stones to the channel, thickening until the passage closes. Air glistens with snow that shrouds his tiny dwelling. No one would know that under the mound he is breathing, not his sister, nephew, stepbrother, those he lied to and stole from, cursed and punched out. Far from his scabby, mittened hands, a boy jaywalks across the street, bragging to a girl on his phone, shaking a box of candy for the last piece. He's being followed, maybe by police, maybe by MS-13. He won't make it to the next block, see the sun again, or a river, or his grandma's blue mobile home with a saint in the yard. Far from Manhattan, where lights blink red but no one stops. A tenant hammering the tower's gilded door is admitted through the poor door. Past the atrium, rats chase rats upstairs. This next poem has a title that's a quote from a book by Toni Morrison, The Origin of Others. And the poem is, "For the stranger is not foreign, she is random. Everything I know tells me to retreat from this woman on the bench in front of the nail spa, asking if I'll take her home. She's in pants and long knit sleeves, though it's 90 degrees. While I brought shirts to the dry cleaner next door, she was pacing, talking. No cell phone or Bluetooth. Now she calls to me. Will I drive her to Lexington instead of ripping husks from sweet corn at Whole Foods? Her gray hair's trimmed, neat. She may be younger than me. It's hot. She has no purse. Wrong to call the police. Agreed. I could offer to pay for a cab. Feed my sheep, the gospel choirs. Don't talk to strangers. Mom warned me and I warned Liz. What could this anxious beggar do I couldn't undo? Timid, Jeff calls my driving, as if to summarize my life. This next poem is called Receipt. I don't think I need to say anything about it. I think it's self-explanatory. Receipt. The cashier at CVS asks if I want a receipt, and I smile, no. The gas pump screen chimes receipt, yes, / no, and I tap no, since I heard the ink on the paper is carcinogenic, or maybe the paper itself. Buying groceries, I crumple a 2-foot printout I don't need since every transaction's recorded by my credit card and I don't bother with coupons. No one questions whether I own my lunch meat or prescription or the fuel that guns me out of town. I overheard a man laugh in Sears when asked if he wanted a bag for his gold toes. Are you kidding? A black man walking out of here with a pair of socks in his hand? Whereas I disdain plastic bags that might stuff a landfill. Whereas no one will ask whether I own the shoes I wear leaving the store, my old sandals left in a box for the clerk to dispose of. In 3 towns, in 3 states, no one looks twice when I drop something into my purse. Could be nail polish, could be a gun, could be a bottle I'm nipping at. Hello, hashtag white lady feminist who never got a ticket, always a warning, okayed by TSA pre-check. If I want to return a sweater, I'll return the sweater with or without a receipt. I'm going to read a poem called Egg, which is about leaving Florida, which I usually spend the winter there. And I want to say hello to my Florida friends who are listening in tonight and watching. And one of the great benefits of Zoom is the number of people who can, from many different places, tune in. So I have family, I have friends from all over, and I want to thank all of them, all of you, for being here tonight. So I was leaving Florida, and this is what I found in my refrigerator. Poem begins with a story about the poet Osip Mandelstam and a poem that he wrote about Stalin, comparing Stalin's figures to grubs, that ended up getting him arrested and exiled to Siberia. And the night before that, he had dinner with the other great Russian poet, Anna Akhmatova. So you'll see how that ends up relating to Florida. Egg. Who imagines the future as it will happen? Did Mandelstam think he'd die for comparing Stalin's fingers to grubs? The night of his arrest, his wife invited Akhmatova for dinner and boiled her an egg. A fresh egg was a rare thing. Before the secret police took him, Mandelstam ate the egg Akhmatova offered with salt. I cleaned the refrigerator before leaving the place I've lived for 6 months. There's a carton with one egg left. The look of hibiscus beguiled me and jasmine perfume for half the year. I cared for now, forget the future. Now what should I do with this egg? Not enough for a meal, stale, maybe good for a batch of pancakes. My mother said wasting food is a sin. There are people on this planet, thousands, who die for an egg. Though at my age it won't, I assume the future will be like now. My friends would laugh if I gave them a single egg. Would my mother laugh, or her mother, widowed with 3 children? I dropped the egg. The disposal grinds it to a slurry that will be flushed and purified, mingled with the river and salting the sea. This is my lyric for failing to find one of the homeless vets camped by the river and giving him the egg. I kayaked once past a tent patched with a blue tarp, and Jeff, curious, wanted to paddle ashore. I could barely find breath to say no, so profound was the privacy of a sandy crescent between mangroves. A tent, a hibachi, a folding chair, a styrofoam cooler. Who could have dreamed this future? And an egg, what could one egg do to redeem it? When I'm in Florida, my husband, Jeff, who's still working, comes and goes. He'll be down for a week, 10 days, or 2 weeks, and then he'll go back to Massachusetts. So this poem is called Snowbird Song. And it's also about a group that I'm part of down there. It's called the Poetry Circle, and we meet at this wonderful bookstore, Copperfish Books in Punta Gorda. And each person brings a poem, not one that he or she's written, and just talks about why we like it so much. And this poem is based on a poem by Jane Kenyon, which is a poem I was bringing to one of those poetry circles. Snowbird Song. In March, I Google words that will startle local book club women out of their bodies into tufts of moss, ferns unfurling, sedges grown inch by inch, the sparrows, Peabody, Peabody. A New England spring as far from the Gulf as apples from oranges. I left my volumes, Dickinson, Williams, Rich, in Massachusetts with you, another faraway love I touch through wireless ether, listen to but can't inhale like earth after soaking equinoctial rain. I haven't seen a crocus burst its button from lacy snow, or forsythia bloom, or peepers pipe their lust in 4 winterless years. Tonight, waiting for my return, you hold your phone out the car window so I can hear. So different things drive me to write poems. That last one was through a lot of different experiences. This one, called Lonely in Japan, was from reading an article that was in the New Yorker. And the first lines of this poem are pretty much straight from that article. Lonely in Japan. In Japan, you can hire a family if your wife has died and your daughter won't speak to you. You fill a form with their common gestures and favorite foods, nicknames and hairstyles. Nights are loneliest, the blue face of the TV evident to revelers and dog walkers. Nights when you don't speak to a soul except yourself, talking to yourself, a habit. Some think America is the loneliest place, miles between towns, neighbors you avoid because they own guns. An old Japanese woman raises her window shade each morning, watching the old woman across the courtyard raise her shade, expecting she will notice the day it stays down. But she forgets which window she's checking and whether someone new has moved into the other apartment. Some nights I watch the sun drop, the clouds go plumb. A loud splash from the pond, the susurrus of crickets, what whistles like a whippoorwill. None of these voices comforts me. Would I hire comfort? And what's the difference between a comforter and a friend? Job's comforters made things worse. Left without cattle, house and barn burned, children slaughtered. Job's wife said, "Curse God and die." Loneliness says the same. Maybe I'll hire a small god who washes my feet with water sprayed from his trunk. Out of our bodies we'd sail over the Peace River, trumpeting our blessed detachment above the black mangroves whose salty leaves taste like tears. Admit there are more transistors in the world than leaves on trees. Admit this adds to the world's loneliness as seen from the back of a small god, rented for a few hours, like a hotel room in a city where your visa has expired. In a foreign capital with a population of 1, there's still hope that 1 will be your friend. A couple of poems that are a little lighter than the past ones. This first one is a very, 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 very rough translation of one of the odes of Horace, book 4. It's titled Already the Winds of Thrace. And I don't speak Latin, and I think I cribbed the translation from Charles Wright. Thank you, Charles Wright. After Horace. Now heat opens the supple buds and warms the shore, gentling winds that beat the waves to a meringue of whitecaps, lashing small craft to the docks. Meadows sprout from oozing mud. Barn swallows patch their nests, dipping at dusk to pick off gnats like Ms. Pac-Man swallowing pellet dots. Horses stretch their necks over the stall door, scenting the sugary tufts. After an hour's grazing, a groom pulls them back to the barn, afraid of newgrass colic. It's hot. Let's drink. You bring hors d'oeuvres. A proper cocktail party, not a binge. Dear friend, it's bad to drink alone. Break out of your cave and sit by me. Your rich pals moan about missed putts while you shudder over life and death. Split a magnum, buy a tin of caviar. We'll laugh at rogues, set the world to rights, map constellations with double stars, ignore our achy knuckles, knees, and hips in a self-medicated dance. The guest bed's made up. Don't think of driving home. For many years, I took a dance class called NIA, which is meant to exercise not only your body, but your nervous system by getting you to do movements involving different sides of the body and crossing the midline and all sorts of things, which made me think of being 6 years old and taking ballet class when I lived in New York. But I'm a lot older than that now. This poem is called Ending with the Corpse Pose. I flip my hands around, step left a quarter turn, spine narrow and tall, inflexible as a ship's mast. Music surges in a wave, shake your booty. The others pitch and roll like mermaids. Move in 4 directions, leg up, arms down, forward, right, which I can't tell from left without a moment's thought. All meant to stimulate the old nervous system. And we're old, that junk in the trunk packed like our basements. Soon we'll shake, 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 stem to stern in a perfect storm of illness and chemo brain. We'll swivel our hips past towers of newspaper, aisles between shaped by our bent shoulders. Roll them forward, back, point and flex. Stretch, breathe, lie down in what yoga calls the corpse pose. After dancing like a water spout as you did at 16, tipsy on wine coolers, be the flood tide before a full moon. It's the moon you want, after all. I'm going to read two more poems. This next poem is about a moon. It's about a moon of Saturn called Enceladus. And again, a lot of the language here I cribbed from an article in Science Daily. Life on Enceladus. It's snowing all the time at the south pole of Enceladus, which is a moon of Saturn with the loveliest name and the brightest object in the solar system, reflecting 90% of the sun's light. Its surface like the best powder day. So cold, no life could multiply, except the orbit of Enceladus around Saturn is elliptical and squeezes the moon's interior to liquid, and also what's frozen underneath the white mantle. So now and then a geyser of salt water sprays upward, and perhaps growing in the water, a litter of microbes as yet undiscovered, but possible. Its alien DNA unsullied because capped beneath ice and acres of snow deeper than Everest is high, Enceladus, like the white canvas of eternity, stroked by a brush with a single hair. And the last poem I'm going to read is called Irish Music. And again, I think it's pretty self-explanatory. Irish music. A blind man with sight surgically restored can't recognize what he sees in blobs of color, puzzle shapes. He walks in a painting by Clay or Miro. With no depth perception, everything's flat. To a woman with Alzheimer's, a dark red rug looks like a hole in the floor, a bloody hole. She can't open her front door without stepping past it and won't let anyone in, except a blind man maybe, who wouldn't notice anything amiss. In movies, a doctor unwraps enough bandages to succor a regiment before the big reveal. The hero can see again. In life, the newly sighted sometimes prefer darkness to looming abstractions accelerating past at hard to reckon speeds. So the operation is reversed, which allows the man to sit next to the demented woman, a sweet woman who loves Irish music, and hold her hand as long as it needs to be held. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. That was a spectacular reading from all of you. I'm so appreciative. It's amazing because I know most of these poems were written before our current circumstance, but it's amazing how much the feeling in them connects to our worries of the moment. And some of the poems that were describing various forms of loneliness, I think, are things that that really are part of our nervous systems now. So just really thanks to all of you for a great job. And on behalf of everybody watching, I'm going to do jazz hands to applaud you. And again, thank you to the library. I don't know if any of the poets want to have a last word. Go for it. Or not, that's fine too. I can't hear you, Jeff, you're muted.
Thanks for coming, everybody. That was nice of you to show up. Listen, nice to listen to these guys too.
Thanks, everybody, and thanks, Cammy. It's a real pleasure. And it's great that people like you and Andrea Cohen are keeping poetry and groups together. Right.
Yes.
Thanks a lot, Stephen.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for coming, and thanks for hosting, and thanks for reading.
Yeah, and Matt, special thank you for all the, setting it up and making sure that nothing untoward occurred. Very much appreciate that support.
Sure.
And thanks to the library. All right, everybody, have a wonderful evening, and I hope we see each other soon in a more real way.
Thanks, Cammy. Thanks.
Thank you, Cammy.
Bye.